That's fine. Yeah, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Tell me where you're going. If you're over here, instead of over there. See what angle you can get, the best you can get. This is my first time in here. Where's a good place for me to set up?
Boy, I think this is pretty much as it is.
Can I set up next to you? Who's my...
I had what he said, but yeah.
You were still on? Did you want them? Innocence? Well, whatever.
All right.
Whatever. Okay. Yeah. Whatever. Just got to make sure who's here. It's going to be fair to everyone. You know what I mean? That's all it is. All right.
Might be better right there, honestly, because you get a better. Because this is pretty a profile shot next to me.
Hi, shoot over the shoulder. How tight can I be? I need to shoot around this place.
You might get kicked out if you're going to be there, honestly, because they told us that we had to be in the jury box. So, just you can try it, but I'm just saying.
got to turn down all the proceedings.
No, but they don't want to know either. He hasn't told them once. Okay.
All right. Okay.
Good afternoon, Your Honor. Cyrus, Vance, District Attorney for New York County.
Good afternoon, Your Honor. Carrie Dunn for the people.
Good afternoon, Your Honor. Charles King for the people.
On behalf of Mr. Aziz and Mr. Islam, David Shanies. Good afternoon, Your Honor.
Good afternoon. On behalf of Mr. Aziz and the family of the state of Mr. Islam, Barry Scheck from the Innocence Project.
On behalf of Mr. Aziz and the family of Mr. Islam, Vanessa Potkin, also from the Innocence Project.
Good afternoon, Your Honor. On behalf of Mr. Aziz and Mr. Islam, Deborah Francois.
Is that everyone? Good afternoon. Right. My understanding is that there is a joint motion to be filed. Has that not been filed?
It has, Your Honor.
Okay. And are the parties looking to make a record?
We have a motion to make on record.
I'll hear you then.
Thank you. Your Honor, thank you very much for agreeing to hear us today and to have us before you on this matter. We are moving today to vacate the convictions and dismiss the indictments of Muhammad Aziz and Khalil Islam for the assassination of Malcolm X on February 21, 1965. But I want to begin by saying directly to Mr. Aziz and his family, and to the family of Mr. Islam, and the family of Malcolm X, that I apologize for what were serious, unacceptable violations of law and the public trust. I apologize on behalf of our nation's law enforcement for this decades-long injustice, which has eroded public faith in institutions that are designed to guarantee equal protection of the law. Your Honor, we can't restore what was taken away from these men and their families, but by correcting the record, perhaps we can begin to restore that faith. We began, Your Honor, by committing to reinvestigate this matter through our Conviction Integrity Program. And I'm here today at Council table with Deputy Chief Charles King and our General Counsel, Carrie Dunn, who worked hand in hand with the Innocence Project and the Shanies law firm on this 2-year reinvestigation and a joint motion which we have now submitted to the court. As detailed in our papers, there are 2 grounds for our motion: newly discovered evidence and the failure to disclose exculpatory evidence. There is only one ultimate conclusion. Mr. Aziz and Mr. Islam were wrongfully convicted of the crime. Since January 2020, My office's conviction integrity team has been reinvestigating this case in complete open file collaboration with the Innocence Project and the Shanies law firm, who are joint counsel for Mr. Aziz and Mr. Islam. Now, our search for the truth was severely impacted by the passage of time. In the decade since the tragic afternoon at the Audubon Ballroom, every police investigator and trial attorney on this case has died. In a case that rested entirely on eyewitness testimony, every single eyewitness that testified at trial has died. All of the physical evidence, including the shotgun used in the murder, is gone. No telephone records were obtained at the time, and there is no way to get them now. But what we have obtained in this reinvestigation now are numerous materials that my office tragically did not have in 1965, and thus did not turn over to the defense. Most critically, we have obtained dozens and dozens of reports from the FBI and the NYPD's Bureau of Special Services and Investigations. These records include FBI reports of witnesses who failed to identify Mr. Islam and who implicated other subjects and suspects. And significantly, we now have reports revealing that on orders from Director J. Edgar Hoover himself, the FBI ordered multiple witnesses not to tell police or prosecutors that they were, in fact, FBI informants. Many of those documents were exculpatory. None of them were disclosed to the defense. Without these files, it is clear these men did not receive a fair trial, and in our opinion, their convictions must be vacated. Moreover, under the unique circumstances presented by a 56-year-old case, there can be no retrial on any of the charges contained in the indictment. Therefore, Your Honor, the people believe the indictment against Mr. Aziz and Mr. Islam should be dismissed. So, on behalf of the people of the state of New York, together with the attorneys from the Innocence Project and the Shanies law firm, we jointly move to vacate these convictions on the grounds of newly discovered evidence and the failure to disclose exculpatory evidence at trial, and to dismiss indictment number 871 of 1965 against them. Thank you.
Thank you. Counsel, anything from you?
Yes, Your Honor. Judge Biden, I'm honored to stand here today with my client, Muhammad Aziz, and on behalf of the late Khalil Islam. Today, in an application we make jointly with the district attorney, as you just heard, Mr. Aziz and Mr. Islam moved to vacate their convictions under Criminal Procedure Law, Section 440.10(1)(g), based on newly discovered evidence, and to dismiss the cases against them. As a procedural matter, my clients respectfully request that the records be sealed pursuant to Section 160.50, but the sealing be stayed for 5 days in order so as not to interfere with the significant media coverage taking place here today. In 1965, Muhammad and Khalil were both innocent young black men who were arrested within weeks of the murder of Malcolm X and falsely accused of participating in that terrible crime. These men became victims of the same racism and injustice that were the antithesis of all that Malcolm X stood for. Before, during, and after these men's trial, the NYPD and FBI covered up a tremendous amount of evidence of their innocence, hiding it even from the district attorney. As a result, when Mujahid Halim from New Jersey testified under oath that he and 4 Confederates killed Malcolm X, and that Mr. Aziz and Mr. Islam had nothing to do with it, he was called a liar, while the NYPD and FBI sat on a trove of evidence that corroborated his testimony. The defendants, their lawyers, the court, the prosecution, and the public at large were deceived and cheated. Mr. Aziz and Mr. Islam were wrongfully convicted, and most of the men who murdered Malcolm X never faced justice. Muhammad Aziz was 26 years old when his personal nightmare began. Today he is 83. He is a dignified and brave man who has survived enough injustice and suffering for 1,000 lifetimes. Khalil Islam, a beloved husband, brother, father, grandfather, and great-grandfather, died more than a decade ago, still fighting to clear his name. It is tragic that he never lived to see the day of his exoneration, something he very much deserved. Nothing could give back to these men or their families the decades of freedom that were stolen from them. With that being said, District Attorney Cyrus Vance's decision to join us in correcting these wrongful convictions is extremely important, and it was the just and right thing to do. I want to acknowledge also his General Counsel, Carrie Dunn, Assistant District Attorneys Charles King and Peter Casolaro for their integrity, professionalism, and candor in this process. I want to thank my co-counsel at the Innocence Project, Barry Scheck and Vanessa Potkin, for working with us on this historic effort. I also want to thank the countless supporters and advocates who have stood behind Mohammed and Khalil, including many community leaders who denounced this injustice. Among them is the Honorable Albert Vance, former City Councilman and State Assemblyman, who 40 years ago, as chair of the Black and Puerto Rican Legislative Caucus, called for Mohammed and Khalil's release and aptly noted that neither Malcolm's memory nor justice is served when two innocent men languish in prison for a crime they did not commit. I thank Mr. Vance for joining us here today, among our client's many other supporters. Finally, I wish to acknowledge and appreciate Abdur Rahman Mohammed, Rachel Drexen, and Phil Bertelson, who recently created the work, Who Killed Malcolm X? Work that shone a bright light on this tragic injustice and helped us get where we are today. And last, I want to thank the fabulous lawyers in my office, including Morgan Miller and especially Deborah Francois, who traveled the country with me during the pandemic to investigate this case, to get to the truth, and to exonerate two innocent men. With that, Your Honor, I give the floor to Barry Scheck.
Your Honor, I join in all the remarks of my colleague, Mr. Shanies. It is an honor and a privilege for the Innocence Project to be representing Mr. Aziz and the family of Mr. Islam. The damage done to them and their families by this wrongful conviction is immeasurable. Truth be told, this has been an exoneration in plain sight for decades. Scholars, journalists, and the filmmakers that made Who Killed Malcolm X, Mike Wallace, in 1980, in an incredible episode, also entitled Who Killed Malcolm X, brought forth a lot of the evidence that we have relied upon here today to make the case that these two men were wrongfully convicted and that exculpatory evidence was suppressed. Truth be told, today's official acknowledgement that the FBI and NYPD suppressed exculpatory evidence in their possession in 1966, even from the prosecutors, is what led to their wrongful conviction. They would have not been convicted, and I think I can fairly say, with the evidence that we saw in the reinvestigation, Mr. Halim would have been vindicated. They would have agreed and found the 4 other people that committed this crime with him. If that information, that exculpatory information, had been disclosed, not only would it have changed the verdict in this case, but it would change the history of the civil rights movement in this country. It would not have been a total surprise for the American public to know about what's known as Operation COINTELPRO, which was a systematic effort, unfortunately, by the Federal Bureau of Investigation to disrupt the Black Power and civil rights movement in this country. And it is an enormous tragedy that this assassination occurred on the very day that Malcolm X was about to give a speech announcing and explaining the Organization of African American Unity, which was an extraordinary step in the progress of the civil rights movement in this country. Bitter truth be told, that disclosure of exculpatory evidence to the prosecutors, to the defense, and to the public did not happen. We don't know exactly how or why this exculpatory evidence was suppressed. A reinvestigation was able to get more information, but the bigger question of how or why this happened still remain unanswered. It would be helpful, as Mr. Van, who's here today, and others have called for, a larger investigation with greater access to evidence to get the history right. We think that should happen. But it was beyond the capacity of this conviction reinvestigation process to do that. Now, official acknowledgement of a wrongful conviction is extraordinarily important. It didn't do Mr. Aziz or the family of Mr. Islam, an enormous amount of benefit to know that everybody recognized who had seriously studied this case, that they were innocent. What mattered is what Cyrus Vance, Carrie Dunn, Charles King, and Peter Casolaro did with us in this case, and that is just acknowledge the bitter truth. It's not a great day for celebration, but acknowledging the bitter truth officially, the state admitting that it was wrong, is an enormous step. Now, I know that he's not going to like it, but our friend Peter Casolaro was somebody that we asked Mr. Vance, Mr. Dunn, and Mr. King to work on this case. And Peter Casolaro also worked with Ms. Popkin and I years ago, investigating the case, reinvestigating the case of people we call the Exonerated Five, the people that were wrongly convicted of having attacked a Central Park jogger. And we are really grateful to our colleagues for allowing and assigning Peter to work on this case. He is a brilliant lawyer. He is a person of terrific integrity. Couldn't be here today because of a hip operation, and he's very, very modest. But he is somebody that speaks truth to power. So with that, I turn it over to
I'm going to keep my remarks brief. I know that co-counsel Deborah Francois is going to talk more extensively about the tremendous devastating impact of this wrongful conviction on Mr. Aziz and Mr. Islam. I did want to bring into the fold today the family of Malcolm X and the devastation that his assassination brought to his wife, Betty Shabazz, who was with him, his daughters who were in the ballroom and witnessed their father assassinated, and the consequences for his family, and also the consequences for the world. We lost a great leader, and when we look at the criminal legal system and where we are today as we're waiting for justice and verdicts in the Rittenhouse case and Ahmaud Arbery, where have we come? We still have a system that works to protect some and oppress others. And what would the world have been had this assassination not taken place? What would Mr. Aziz and Mr. Islam's life have been if the past 55 years had not been robbed from them and their families? I would just like to reiterate what Barry said, which is this conviction integrity process focused on Mr. Aziz and Mr. Islam's wrongful convictions, and it unearthed evidence that the FBI and the NYPD hid evidence. These were not just innocent mistakes, and many wrongful convictions aren't. They're the result of official misconduct. And it doesn't stop with this exoneration. We need to know how, we need to know why, and we need to understand the extent of the involvement of the government in both the assassination of Malcolm X and the wrongful conviction of Mr. Aziz and Mr. Islam.
Good afternoon, Your Honor. echo the sentiments of my colleagues that it is a privilege to be here today on behalf of Muhammad Aziz and the late Khalil Islam. As others have described, it is an understatement to say that Mr. Aziz and Mr. Islam have suffered tremendously. Evidence of their innocence was in the hands of the FBI within hours of the murder of Malcolm X. In the weeks and months that followed, the FBI and NYPD continued to amass a wealth of information pointing to 5 men from New Jersey as the true killers of Malcolm X and demonstrating Mr. Aziz and Mr. Islam's innocence. Both the FBI and NYPD withheld such evidence from the defense and the prosecution, allowing 2 innocent men to spend a combined 42 years in prison. Mr. Aziz and Mr. Islam's wrongful convictions and decades-long imprisonment caused far-reaching loss for both men, for their families and communities, for Malcolm X's family, and for all of us who believe in and work to uphold the integrity of the criminal justice system. While Mr. Aziz and Mr. Islam were denied a fair trial back in 1966, it is not too late to give them a measure of justice today. District Attorney Cyrus Vance has made the just and wise decision to join with us in moving to vacate these men's convictions, dismiss all charges against them, and clear names. It is now my true honor to turn the floor over to Muhammad Aziz.
The events that brought us to court today should never have occurred. Those events were and are the result of a process that was corrupt to its core, one that was all too familiar to black people in 2021. While I do not need this court, these prosecutors, or a piece of paper to tell me I'm innocent, I am very glad that my family, my friends, and the attorneys who have worked and supported me all of these years are finally seeing the truth that we have all known, officially recognized. I'm an 83-year-old man who was victimized by the criminal justice system. I do not know how many more years of creative activity I have. However, I hope the same system that was responsible for this travesty of justice also takes responsibility for the immeasurable harm caused to me during the last 55 or 56 years. Thank you, Your Honor.
Anything further? Thank you. Thank you for your remarks. The court has reviewed the joint motion that's been filed today, which seeks a vacator of the judgments of conviction of Muhammad Aziz and Khalil Islam pursuant to Criminal Procedure Law 440-10-1G on the grounds of newly discovered evidence and failure to disclose exculpatory information, and for dismissal of Indictment 871 of 1965 against them pursuant to Criminal Procedure Law 210-40. With respect to the CPL 440-10-1G motion to vacate, as set forth in that joint motion and through the record established today, the court finds that an earnest reinvestigation has uncovered significant evidence that was not known to the defendants at the time of the trial, which evidence is of such character as to create a probability that had such evidence been received at the trial, the verdict would have been more favorable to the defendants. Under New York law, dismissal of an indictment in the interest of justice is warranted only where such dismissal is required as a matter of judicial discretion by the existence of some compelling factor, consideration, or circumstances clearly demonstrating that the conviction of a defendant upon the indictment would constitute or result in injustice. The court has and must consider the factors set forth in CPL Section 210-40, Sub 1, and as the New York courts have clarified, the court's discretion to dismiss an indictment should be exercised sparingly, end quote, in that rare and unusual case which cries out for fundamental injustice beyond the confines of conventional considerations. That's People versus Insignaris, 109 AD 2D 221, First Department, quoting People versus Belge, 41 New York 2D 60. There can be no question that this is a case that cries out for fundamental justice. This court's paramount purpose is, and always has been, to uphold the law and pursue justice. To Mr. Aziz and your family, and to the family of Mr. Islam, I regret that this court cannot fully undo the serious miscarriages of justice in this case and give you back the many years that were lost. Dismissal of the indictment is the full extent of this court's authority. But for the reasons set forth in the joint application and based on the record that has been made today, this court's mandate requires that the judgments of conviction be vacated and that the indictment against Mr. Aziz and Mr. Islam be dismissed. The joint motion is hereby granted, and the record with respect to Mr. Aziz and Mr. Islam will be sealed, and at the party's request, sealing of that record will be stayed for 5 days until November 26th. Thank you very much.
That's it. Seating's over. Filming's over. You want them to wait here? Yeah. Okay. Just wait here for now. No more filming. Cameras are down. That's it. Seating's over. Start packing up.
just come to the mics for a moment?
Sure.
Just tell us what you thought listening to the hearing today, the fact that your father isn't here to experience all of this.
Exactly. The fact that he's not here, it brings only a little satisfaction because I was in my mother's belly when he was taken. So for 25 years, there was no father-son connection except through, visitation rooms. So the fact that it almost sounds casual to me that he's being exonerated. So the great pleasure is not there because he's not here with me. So in the fact that the family suffered growing up with concerns of fear of people coming after us or to, walk in school looking over my shoulder, those kind of things you can't get back. So normality was gone when I was 10, because in 1975 we were forced to leave where we lived because it was assumed that someone was coming after us. So my childhood was over at the age of 10. So right now this is great, but not so great at the same time. So I am happy, but there's still sadness, so that's how I feel.
What's next for you and your family?
We're not sure. We're talking to the attorneys, and we'll see what happens next.
What's your name, sir?
Shahid Johnson. Shahid Johnson.
Is it HID?
S-H-A-H-I-D.
Can you talk about some of the questions that were made about inferences, how this evidence made it official?
Well, all I did was read growing up. I was quite fascinated with the whole case, so I knew all the evidence growing up. Every year I just read more books, and if I was able to discover the truth, I couldn't understand why nobody else could. And I was a kid. All I did was read the books that was left in my house. So I'm confused. Say it again?
Did your father ever think he was there to stay with them?
I don't know. Because when we spoke, we would speak of other things. He was at a point where he looked towards his spirituality to keep him, whole. So it wasn't about the type of things that most people would be thinking about. It was just about him being okay and being normal. So that was his focus.
Do you think there's a connection between police brutality today and this?
Well, there's definitely a lack of concern for certain members of the community. So, that's evident because the evidence speaks for itself. And I don't think many of those things are ever resolved because we wouldn't take 50-something years to have exoneration.
The judge and the prosecutor apologized to your family. Is that apology enough?
It's hard. No, it's really not. It's too much. It's too much discomfort, sadness. Imagine growing up worrying about this every single day of your life. As a kid, you're in the classroom, you're looking out the window, and you're not wondering about what's being taught in class. You're worrying about what's going on in the world. So no, it's a lot.
Do you think your family really say God to do as well as Mr.
That's something that we definitely would look into. Like I said, it's not going to bring my father back. I lost my mother. My mother passed away, almost 20 years ago, and she suffered, through the whole thing. I watched her handle her motherly responsibilities by herself, and it was trying. She had lupus. Right. She had lupus, and she struggled. She struggled with sickness. She had to take care of us. She had to worry about us, scared to death every day we left the house. So it was a lot. It's a lot. It's a lot for an exoneration just to take away everything.
Does it feel a little unreal to you that this day has finally come?
Exactly. It's going to take me a week to process this. It's a lot to take in. It's a lot to take in.
What does your father say about that?
we didn't talk too much about Malcolm X. You know, my time spent with him was trying to get to know him. So we didn't talk about the case too much, and he felt he didn't really want to talk about it because maybe he was so disappointed the way things went. So maybe he preferred not to talk about it.
Today we heard for the first time that J. Edgar Hoover, the FBI director, is the one who gave the order for the FBI not to share some of this information that is now exonerating your father posthumously. Can you tell me how it feels to know that someone in the American government that high up, that close to the president, was invested in this outcome that branded your father a killer forever for the rest of his life?
Well, you know what? I was fortunate because my father left a lot of books in the house. So I was able to read a lot, and I was able to understand that I had a full understanding of that system. And it's not surprising, I've always been upset that I would never stop being upset about what happened because all of that affected me. So I would never stop being upset about that. I was in my mother's belly. So that's why I wasn't born yet. You know, my brother, he was 1 year old. You know, so we both grew up together, looking over each other's backs, worrying about, you know, is someone coming to get us?
Was your mother actually pregnant at the time?
Yes. 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 I mean, can you come over?
Sir, how are you feeling?
Bittersweet, emotions running everywhere. The fact that my father and my mother weren't here, are not here alive to see this and to experience the exoneration is painful because they suffered a lot. They suffered a lot. I believe that their deaths was a direct result of the stress and drama and trauma and post-traumatic stress that this whole situation has caused on them. So I can't say that I'm completely happy because they're not here, and I think that the effects of it removed them from our lives. So
I would definitely agree.
We're gonna get together and think about what's next for the family.
Sir, what's your name? What's your name and last name?
Amin Johnson.
Amin Johnson. E-E-N.
A-M-E-E-N.
Johnson. Yes.
A-M-E-N.
I'm sorry?
Amin, can you...
Right.
Amin, can you talk about what your father, and you too, Shahid, about what your father was like before he went to prison and before he was
Oh, well, I wouldn't know.
And after, I know he'll do the before, but the after, I would love to hear from you too. Yeah, I understand.
That is a question I wish I was able to answer. As I said, I was 1.5 years old. Unfortunately, my sisters are not here, who were older than I, who would be able to give you a better recollection,
a better view on that.
And how what the things he said and did, in talking, just existing as a Black American man along with the
Again, he did not. He chose not to talk about that too much because you got to imagine how difficult it was for him. If he was to keep it in constant conversation, he would constantly be upset. So when he got his freedom, so-called freedom, it was better for him to not discuss it, to live life and focus on that.
Absolutely.
Of course we did.
I can definitely say that...
Well, we have family members that were present and that were around and saw him home. So there was no question about that.
You know, he struggled. He struggled with getting reconnected with society and trusting the government, trusting that this wrong would be right, and with just adapting to getting back his life. It wasn't easy for him, and that I know for sure. It put a big strain on the father-son relationship. It put a strain, and I understood that because he was trying to get reconnected with just who he is and how to deal with it and stay sane. So,
and he did have a lot of regret. One thing he did say to me often, that he regretted that he couldn't give me what he would like to have been able to give me. So, yeah, that's the only thing he would say. It wouldn't go any further than that.
I think he did.
I stopped believing it, for sure. I almost just had to just disconnect from the whole thing and then just try to live my life.
How's it feel for the day to have finally come?
Bittersweet, like my brother said. It's bittersweet. You know, it's going to take some time just to learn how. We have to learn how to appreciate it. Because right now we can't fully appreciate it right now. It's a good thing that happened, but it's not. You know, it doesn't replace everything that we lost.
And how would your father have felt today? You know, you can imagine that.
He'd be ecstatic. I mean, I know that he'd be ecstatic because his name meant a lot to him. His reputation meant a lot to him. And I just think he'd be very happy to know that, you know, his name is clear. He don't have to watch over his back. We don't have to watch over our backs, worrying about any repercussions for anybody who thought that we might have been, or he might have been the one who killed Malcolm X.
When he passed away, did he express anything about that before he passed?
The only thing he did was grab my hand. So I don't know what he was trying to tell me.
Do you feel like you grew up with like the stigma of the family?
Of course.
Oh, absolutely. I had many fights in my days with people.
Well, most for me is a matter of
coming at me because of they felt that, you know, they would say my father killed Malcolm X, and I had to defend that. So,
is that in grade school or high school? Or?
Junior high school mostly, grade school mostly.
For me, I kept a secret identity. I had to pretend like I was, you know, there was no sharing of who my father was at all. You know, I never discussed it.
In school, right?
I have friends today, they're looking at me and they're in shock because they can't believe so many years passed and they had no idea.
Do you have any words for the people involved in the Innocence Project?
Nothing but gratitude. Nothing but gratitude. You know, I wish I knew them personally myself, but it's nothing but gratitude.
Absolutely.
I believe it's present. How present it is, I don't know. But I can't see a system just changing completely that way. I'm a non-believer. Now, I know plenty of people in law enforcement that are good people, friends, family, but the system definitely is flawed. And there's something seriously wrong when this can happen and carry over for so many years. The question is already self-evident. It can't be a system that's correct because it wouldn't take this long. You mean the system couldn't be correct just yesterday? You know, that doesn't make sense to me. You know, so everyone who knew about this case that let it lay for so many years, they were comfortable with the circumstances. So that's my opinion.
When you say you're a non-believer, you mean a non-believer?
I'm a non-believer in the fairness of the system.
What is your understanding about what somebody made that's holding anyone accountable for so long dead or so much time has passed? What is your understanding of what's next?
But that's a question for me. It's just a question. What does happen? I don't know. I'd like to see.
Have you spoken to Mr. Aziz today at all?
I didn't get a chance.
No, not yet.
Well, I will speak to him.
Yeah. What do you think about a government that could do this?
I think something's wrong with it. I think something's wrong with it. I think that it needs a lot of correction. Like I said, I know people in law enforcement, they're great people, but apparently there's not everybody in law enforcement is great people. That's all I have to say.
Do you lay what happened to your father at the feet of the ministry?
Absolutely. There's no other way for me to look at it. Is that it? All right, thank you. All right.
Zach, come here.
Sorry.